Welcome to 22 Sounds album highlights of 2022. I gotta say, I love year-end lists. I love reading them, I love watching them, I love talking to people about them. For one, I always find it interesting to see what other people deem the highlights of a particular year. But also, of course, oftentimes I might find some albums on there that I might have missed throughout the year. Maybe I didn't pay enough attention to and I kind of revisit them. So I hope I can do this for you with this list, and you find some stuff you might have missed throughout the year and hopefully end up liking just as much as I do. Just a little bit about us. I'm Manuel Gemperli. We're 22 Sound record store in Mandeville, Louisiana. That's right outside of New Orleans. So if you're in the New Orleans area, if you're visiting or even live here, come visit us. If you're too far away, no problem. We have a web store as well, 22soundrecords.com. You can order your record straight through us and support a local, independent, family-owned and operated store in the process. I'll put the order links for all the records that I'm talking about in the description of the video as well. And of course, depending on when you're watching this, some might be unavailable at that very moment. But hey, I always look at the store as a bit of an evolving mass of records. Basically, every day some records go out, but records come in all the time too, so it always pays to check back. All right, so this list, I keep it very loose here, I have to say. I'm not ranking them, so in no particular order. I figured some of these records are so different from each other, it would be kind of almost silly to rank them exactly. So these are just records that stood out to me throughout the year that I thought were really good, that deserve mentioning here. And of course, I'm sure as soon as I upload this, I'll think of some that I've forgotten about for the moment or that I should have included. So please put in the comments, what do you think? What were your highlights of the year? What do you think about the records that I'm discussing here? And let's get right into it. Well, first up we have a record that came out really early in the year, Black Country New Road, Ants from Up There. I gotta say, I always love when a band like that that's really kind of out there, really kind of unusual, gained some success. They got a good bit of attention with their first album, and then this album came along really shortly after that, and it was a bit of a departure from what they were doing. Before, it was a bit of a quieter album, and they were really hard to categorize, I have to say. It's, I guess, a rock album overall, but there's elements of post-rock in there, even like jazz, and some chamber music, if you want to call it that. There's really a lot of different influences there. They're really kind of breaking conventions, and it's nice that they do that in a way that still seems organic. They're not weird for weirdness sake. There's really an emotional quality to this, and I think that's what makes this record so great, and actually to me personally even better than the first album. Isaac Wood, the frontman of the band, he left the band, well, I think it was right around the release, maybe even a bit before it was actually released, and so it's in a way kind of like a breakup album. Apparently had to deal with some mental health issues, and yeah, you can hear kind of that emotional intensity on this album. What's cool though is they have some songs that are a little shorter too. They can do that too, especially Chaos Space Marine, the opener. There's a little intro track, but then the actual opener is actually a pretty straightforward song, about 3.5 minutes long. I feel like the chorus has a bit of a pulp-ish quality to it, reminded me a little bit of Pulp, but then they also have some songs that are just really long. Basketball Shoes is over 12 minutes long, and they really just let these compositions flow in the way they see fit, and I think they do that really well. Some moments they get really quiet, they play with the dynamics, but those quiet moments really actually help the eruptions that follow feel even more triumphant afterwards. So I thought it was a really well-composed album, really special, something they sound like no other band, and that's always a great thing if it's in the form of really good song, and it's, like I said, not just weird for weirdness sake or anything. There's really a lot of great melodies, great lyrics throughout this album, and yeah, it'll be interesting. It seems like this was really kind of Isaac Wood's album. He front and center, and here his vocals are very, very important to this, despite the really interesting instrumentation. So it'll be interesting where they go from here, but that's the beauty of albums. Once they're here, they're kind of frozen in time, and they stay forever as long as people listen to it. Great album. Next up is another band that mixes some genres together, but does it in a completely different way. So this is not comparable at all. It's Vylan, The Price of Life. Man, that was really maybe the album that blew me away the most at just first listen. It was really not expected. Never heard of that band before, to be honest. But when I listened to this album, it was just so much fun. It starts out basically kind of like a grime record in essence, and that's kind of what I expected where this was going, but then it started branching out into all kinds of different directions. There are some moments where it's just pure hardcore. There are even some alt-rock kind of moments in there. The vocals they kind of vary from rapping to shouting to just regular quote-unquote singing. And it is highly, highly political. These guys are really, really, really angry, and they really don't care who they could possibly piss off, and that's really refreshing. They do it in a really good way. That every song surprises you again, so it really stays super entertaining from beginning to the end. It reminds me a little bit of like Rage Against the Machine. Not so much that they sound like them, but just in the way that that righteous anger really seems very honest, and it's kind of weird. Like Rage has become basically a classic rock band at this point. I mean, they're kind of in that pantheon of classic rock bands at the moment, and you almost kind of forget how angry they were and how political when they first started. And so this is kind of the vibe to a certain degree that I'm getting from these guys, but done in a very different way, very modern way. And yeah, I gotta say, very, very exciting record. I hope they get some attention. They would definitely deserve it. It's Vylan, The Price of Life. Next up is Archers of Loaf. Their comeback album, Reason in Decline. Have to say, didn't really expect that I would have Archers of Loaf on a 2022 album highlights list. They were an indie rock band from the 90s. Basically the whole, now I guess first part of the career was in the 90s, and they were kind of part of the, how can I say, they kind of were part of the defining of that 90s indie rock sound, and had always really nice melodies in there, but it was pretty aggressive at times, pretty loud. And then towards their later albums, they sometimes got a little, dare I say, weird at times. So it was really interesting to see what would they do. Would they basically just rehash their 90s sound, or would they do something completely different? And I think what they did was actually the perfect balance. This is a much more mature record, and I know at first glance that it almost sounds like an insult, but I mean that in a really positive way. You know, sometimes mature kind of translates to lame, but not in this case. I really think even though they got quieter, their strengths, that excellent songwriting, that knack for really great melodies that really pierce through, they still have that, and they just do it in a little different setting basically, and I think that works really, really, really well for them. It's a very beautiful album. There's very many just beautiful moments on there. Really, some of them gave me goosebumps listening to them, and I think it's a very honest album too. Instead of pretending that they're still in their 20s, yeah, they kind of just do what they're doing now and address the things that matter to them now in a different stage of their life. But because they're doing that, it just feels actually really emotional and intense, and just sounds a little bit different than it did before. Actually, to be honest, well, wasn't the biggest Archers of Loaf fan or anything before that, but I actually like this almost more than what they did before. Maybe because I don't have that personal, direct connection to it. I was too young for them when they first came out. But I have to say I was pleasantly surprised when this album came out. Very, very beautiful album. Archers of Loaf, Reason in Decline. Next up is another band that came back after quite a long hiatus. It's the Hellacopters. Their comeback album was called Eyes of Oblivion. The Hellacopters band that I really loved, and still love, now I can say still love. I actually kind of liked the second part of their career, if you will, better than their initial one. They were kind of, loud and punkish in the beginning, and then became a little more relaxed, I guess you can say. They kind of got into that 70s rock vibe over time. I think High Visibility was really kind of like that moment where they really got into their groove and really did what now I guess kind of defines them. It is a little bit of a throwback to the 70s, but I think what made them so great is, for one, most importantly, their amazing songwriting, but also because they don't sound like one particular band from that era. It's just more of a vibe, kind of the sound that they just really like from that time, that they kind of transport to now. And with this album, they did kind of what I was hoping for, which is basically continuing on the path that they, well, abandoned in the mid-2000s, and just kind of came back to the tail end of their initial career, if you will. And they do it really well. It just seems like it comes so natural to them, the way they play, the way they write their songs. They're really good at writing big choruses. They're just really stick in your head right away. The guitar playing is so tasteful. Some really cool guitar solos on there. I love me some good solos and leads. Something that's kind of, well, not heard as often anymore these days. It's not the shredding kind of guitar solos, but more of the just really melodic playing that really just adds to the song, to the kind of ecstasy of the songs. And yeah, I think they really did a great job at just doing what they've done before, still really well, still really great songs. Which they got a little more attention over here. I think they would really deserve it. You would think the timing is actually pretty good, considering like the success of bands like Red and Bleed or so, for kind of a classic rock-ish band. So we'll see if that translates into success, but definitely I really enjoyed the album. I still do. Next up is Black Midi, a fairly new band. I think the third album, if I'm not mistaken. Hellfire. And yeah, another band that's really difficult to describe because they do a little bit of everything. But I would say, in a way, we could call them progressive rock. Not so much because they sound like, I don't know, Genesis or Yes or so, but because they're, in the actual sense of the word, progressive. They're definitely a rock band. They definitely belong to that rock family tree, but they're really pushing the boundaries and doing something brand new. They have some jazz influences, there's some swing influences, and it's really just very wild. Some weird time signatures at times, and it kind of like starts and stops constantly. There's so many ideas packed into these songs. It's really just wild. They never sit still, but it's super entertaining. And yeah, at times you don't really know, are they serious or are they being silly? They're definitely serious musicians, because you couldn't play that if you weren't. But it's nice that it seems like there's a little sense of humor in their music. don't take everything so seriously. They're really just having fun, and it's really cool to see that a band this wild, this out there, can actually get a little bit of success again nowadays. So this is definitely an album for you. Not a relaxing album, it's a crazy one, but it really gets you going. Black Midi, Hellfire. Next up is a band called Marrasmieli, I think. But the title of the album is Martaiden, Mailta. Yeah, not really sure. Guessing it's Finnish because they're all from Finland. And I have to say, in the metal world, oftentimes if you can't pronounce the band name or the album title, unless I guess you are maybe from Scandinavia, then usually it's worth at least checking them out. Oftentimes pretty good stuff. So definitely goes for them. This was definitely one of my favorite metal albums of the year. It's, I guess you would call it atmospheric black metal with some folk influences. And when I say folk, I mean more the kind of Northern European folk, not so much American type of folk. They're using some, I guess you could call traditional instruments, which are not so traditional in the metal context. And usually I'm not the biggest fan of that when people do that, kind of like my guitar drum bass metal, but they do it sparingly enough and they do it in a really tasteful way that it doesn't seem gimmicky at all. It actually adds to the vibe that they're kind of creating here. And I think they do it really well. This is really, I think, atmospheric in a great sense, in the way that really, like I said, it can create a nice vibe to it. It still has the black metal fury in it, but it is really epic at times too. Compositions are really, really long, so really kind of can get lost in them. And the album cover too, I love that. It just really captures that vibe from that album so perfectly. I really love their first album. I think that this one, their second one, might be even a tiny tad better, so very promising. I'm really looking forward to see what else we can hear from them. Really great band. They really have something special going on here. And at this point, I would just want to kind of open it up a little bit, kind of like a parentheses here. I just want to mention a few black metal records. Here, I was kind of thinking, should I mention all of these? I don't want to make it too, black metal dominated or anything, but I think in this genre there have been some really cool records coming out. I'm a metalhead and I love my black metal, and I think what's been going on in this genre is that a lot of bands have found ways to kind of take those black metal trademarks and add different ingredients to it and make something new, something special. It doesn't always work out great, but when it does, I love how certain bands mix that aggression, that fury, that anger with moments of beauty, and that kind of contrast sometimes works really well. So just a few that I want to mention. One is Ellende, Ellbogengesellschaft. Maybe a little bit more of a traditional, quote-unquote, atmospheric / melodic black metal album. As far as, the traditional instrumentation here, what I really like so much is that there's really like a mournful, emotional, kind of sad atmosphere to it, and that comes mainly from the really nice guitar work, really nice leads, some acoustic guitars in there too. Absolutely great, meticulously crafted, really wonderful album. And with Blackbraid, Blackbraid got a little bit of hype, I guess you can say. Of course, it's always kind of silly when us people in the metal scene talk about hypes, because that means basically more than 25 people have heard of the band. But I guess what kind of got Blackbraid a little bit of attention is that they're, a Native American one-man band that kind of uses some of those Native American folk influences as part of their black metal. So something I guess that we haven't heard in a while, but I think that some people put a little bit too much emphasis on that. There's definitely some of those influences in there, and it makes it really interesting, but I think first and foremost it's just a really good, relentless, amazing black metal record, and that's what makes it so good. and it didn't, those little ingredients, those influences, they make it even better, they make it even more interesting, but mainly it's a really aggressive, nice black metal album, more aggression than I guess on the other ones that I mentioned. So I think the hype is justified, not so much because of, how can I say, not so much just because of where the influence comes from, but just because it's really great music, and I think that's what matters the most. Really great album, Blackbraid. Looking forward to hearing more from that project. And the last black metal band I want to mention here is White Ward with their new album False Light. White Ward has been really one of the, to me, most impressive black metal bands in the last few years. I love their album Love, Exchange, Failure. Basically what they're doing is they're adding jazz elements to black metal, which is really kind of something that when I first read about it before I heard Love, Exchange, Failure, and it was kind of like, sounds a little gimmicky. I was really kind of unsure, but I'm glad I listened to it because it works so well. Those kind of really, really dark, jazzy elements that they're using, they combine them so well with the darkness of the black metal trademarks, and the loud, quiet dynamics work really well to make the eruptions feel even more intense. And they somehow figure out a way that these kind of puzzle pieces really kind of belong together. It doesn't seem like crazy abrupt changes. They seem natural, the way they go from one part to the other. They did that really well on that album, and False Light had high expectations of those that heard that album, and I think they did a really good job at kind of continuing the path that they were on, adding more elements to it. That was not easy to follow a record like that up, but I think they did a really good job at it. Band from the Ukraine, absolutely amazing album, and I hope we'll hear a lot more from them. Alright, so that's kind of closing up my little black metal excursion here, and for the last album of part 1 of my album highlights list, we're going into a completely different direction. It's Angel Olsen and her album Big Time. Gotta say, Angel Olsen off like the, how should I call them, indie pop rock singer-songwriters of recent years, the one that I really like the most. I love her voice. She really has a special voice. Love the tone of her voice, but I also love her songwriting. She's really a good songwriter, really good vocalist. And this is not the album that I expected from her. It's basically a country album. I feel like if nobody had ever heard of her before and this was her first album, this would have been marketed as a straight up country album and nobody would have thought it was anything weird about it. But it really works very well. Actually, in a way, she uses the same strengths that she displayed in her prior work, and just kind of puts a little different spin on it, just kind of packages it basically a little differently. Still really great songwriting. Her voice is beautiful. That's of course what really makes the album, maybe portrays her voice in a way, or showcases her voice in a way even a little more than on her prior releases. And you can tell this is a really emotional album, really personal. From what I hear, she went through a lot of loss, a lot of change in the making of this album. You can hear that, and that's really great. Great art, really portrays where it comes from, the emotions that go into it, and this is really a great showcase of that. An absolutely beautiful album. All right, so this is going the end of part 1. We have another part. I figured I split it up a little bit so it's not too much all at once. And yeah, subscribe to our channel please, so you see when part 2 comes out. And again, let me know what you think about these albums that I mentioned, but of course also what were your highlights of the year. Would love to hear that. I always think it's kind of like a two-way street. I love when I can tell people here in the store or maybe through the videos about some albums that they might have not heard of, before, but I also love when people tell me about stuff that I might have missed. That's basically what I do all the time, discovering music, new and old. So yeah, please let me know what you think about this year's album highlights, and don't forget to give us a follow too on Instagram, Facebook, visit our store, or order from us through our website. Really appreciate your support. Thank you very much. See you for part 2.